Good morning. uh, Good morning, researchers. Good morning, colleagues. I want to say that I'm happy to be here. I want to thank the sponsors for giving me an opportunity to be in front of you to talk about a very difficult topic. I don't know where to start, but we are going to start from somewhere and see where what kind of ideas we can share with regards to research proposal and thesis writing. If you recall, I mean, if you pick any research methods textbook, the research proposal writing or thesis writing is normally at the end of the books. I've always asked myself why. Should we finish, research and then start writing? When do we actually start writing? So that has, that's a question that I've continued to struggle with, and I think there are many young researchers who struggle with that. Currently, I even teach a methodology course to master students as well as to PhD students. They struggle with this. As well as myself as a researcher, I still struggle with it. So when we talk about writing, particularly academic writing, there is surely no one way of how to approach it. And so some of the thoughts that you will hear from me today is partly linked to my experience in terms of how I've approached this, as well as the experiences of some of the students that I've been involved with for many years. And I've been in the academic area for over 23 years. So that may count for something if I look at, that experience with the students, as well as collaboration with other researchers, etc. But I want to start by saying that really we try to teach academic writing, but how effective it is, I'm not sure if it has been effective. And we have here fellow eminent, academics and researchers. They can share with us as well what has been their experience in terms of, academic writing. So I'm just going to talk about academic writing. So the dilemma that I faced is, how do you actually talk about writing, academic writing, within 1 hour and 30 minutes? And so I was made to choose that, can I take an angle to it that we can reflect on? And I had to draw now, in terms of my background, from a systems perspective and ask myself, if I was a student right now, what is the environment that is facing you? Because systems focus on how we adapt to the environment. What would be the environment of a young researcher, or a young academic, or a postgraduate student who is starting this process of research? So this is the dilemma that I am facing. So what you see in front of you is just a snapshot of my understanding of the current environment of the researcher. It's definitely different from what I did face 30 years ago. However, what I want to emphasize is the environment of writing actually changed with the commercialization of the internet since the mid-1990s or the early 1990s. It started changing then. We have somehow tried to resist in many ways. We have continued to try and stick to approaches that have been there for over 400 years since they came up with the scientific method. We still try to imagine, can we practice science the same way that they were practicing? We tend to think that that was the one. But they also warned us then that definitely the practice of science, which I believe research is, it's what the practice of science is all about, has been changing. And I want to emphasize that I'm taking the position that since the commercialization of the internet, it has been changing, and we need to recognize that. And that's why I want to just share some ideas around research proposal writing, but recognizing that changed environment that is now prevalent with artificial intelligence tools. So, the assumption is that they are there to stay, however much we fight. And therefore, as scholars or as academics, we need to reflect on how do we make progress with these tools that are with us. And they didn't just come today or yesterday. Since we started using word processing software, spreadsheets, those have had some form of intelligence and has taken some workload from us as human beings to allow our mind to be free, to think and do other things, because research involves thinking. And my position, therefore, is that AI, or artificial intelligence tools in whatever form, we need to reflect on them and ask ourselves, how can we use them for, for academic writing? So that's the plan that you see in front of you. I want to just start by talking about choosing a right culture of research. Then look at the problem of effective reading. So we are saying that you can't really write before you actually know how to read effectively. When you pick an article, what should you look for in an article? But we are saying we now have AI to help us in this. How can we use AI to help us in this? And we should be bold enough to say that we are actually using AI for doing this. And if there are any ethical issues, that is what we should reflect on. How do we address the ethics of writing, academic writing? And also number 3, therefore, focuses on how to synthesize and write using these AI tools, which I think are referred to as, in many circles, as digital research assistants. So we should regard them as digital research assistants. We should not be giving our minds to the AI. Can we use them the same way we have used the concept of research assistant before in the work that we do, and leave our minds for other things? So this is really what I had planned to share, some of the ideas. They may not be new, but hopefully there will be some discussion in terms of how do we move forward, to mainstream, to have AI tools as part of the research process, and set students free, so that they don't hide when they use these AI tools and, possibly run the risk of academic, plagiarism, so to speak, right? So this is what I had for you. Now, in terms of the culture of research, my emphasis here is that for any research contribution, and this statement may be contestable, for any research contribution, before you write, we all have a particular worldview. Our worldview are shaped by many things, including our history, how we have been trained before. We may not be aware of it, but it does affect us. How you're brought up, the language of instruction that you've used before, how you have been trained, your faith, all in, sort of influence your worldview. And we say that the starting point in terms of contribution in research is, do you understand your worldview, how you approach a particular problem? And in research, we tend to say that, I'm approaching it from a particular paradigm, a particular research paradigm. That in fact, research paradigm is when you choose a paradigm, you're actually choosing a culture that you want to adopt as you make contributions in research. And many believe that that is the starting point. You can't really start making a claim to contribution if you have not selected a worldview, or if you don't, if you don't know about what worldview you should adopt when you're approaching research. So this first slide tries to emphasize that we need to make a choice before we start academic writing in terms of what is the worldview I'm bringing on the table. For instance, I mean, if you are a positivist, if you take a positivist orientation to research, obviously the way you will contribute within that paradigm will be dictated to, in a way, in terms of the demands of that particular paradigm. So for instance, positivism emphasizes the use of the scientific method, and of course, approaching reality objectively. So if that already is the paradigm that you are bringing in terms of a worldview, it is going to influence the kind of research that you're going to do and the kind of contributions that you're going to make. And so the starting point is, as a researcher, what you see in front of you is, the horse rider is representing the researcher. And the horse rider, of course, brings in a worldview in terms of how to approach research and how to approach writing. And that's why at the level of strategy, I'm highlighting there that from that worldview perspective, what kind of ethical standpoints do you bring on the table? Because if you're talking about AI tools, we are actually in the beginning of looking at an artifact that is likely to open us to a lot of ethical issues. And it is already affecting students in terms of how they are contributing. And so what we're trying to emphasize is, how do we approach them so that we set the students free to use them freely for writing purposes, but without falling foul of ethics. And why you see a quotation there from W.B. Yeats. I'm linking it to when the internet was commercialized, that, he says that all changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. He was not talking about the internet. He was talking about, some war which was happening in Ireland in 1916. But if you think about the internet, we love the internet. We see it as very beneficial to us. But there are also aspects of the internet that we know are harmful to society. So there are unintended consequences we know about when you have an innovation. And so AI, as an artifact of the internet, is with us. There may be bad things about it. How can we use it for academic writing? This is the emphasis. And therefore, the researcher must be prepared to confront the dilemmas that are posed by AI. And from an ethical perspective, if you as a researcher is the pilot, you need to make a decision that I would like to use these AI tools ethically, even though nobody is following up how you use it wherever you are. And even the tools may not have caught up with how to check for plagiarism, right? So this is the claim that I'm making. We can use AI, but ethically. The ethical use of AI depends on the worldview that a researcher brings on the table. And if you're therefore guided from that ethical perspective, how can we proceed? That slide summarizes various perspectives in relation to worldviews. So I've talked about paradigms or worldviews. As I've indicated, the different paradigms contribute differently. So if you bring a particular worldview or a paradigm into a research project, then you need to be aware that there will be particular types of contributions that you will be making. You are unlikely to make the same contribution from a different paradigm. So for instance, if you talk about positivist approach to research, in terms of the product of research, we know that you focus on either predictions or testing a theory or modifying a theory, etc. So there are things that are expected if you bring that worldview into the research process. That could be very different from somebody approaching research from a critical realist worldview, because at the core, for instance, of a critical realist research is to emancipate a certain segment of the population. So critical realism, therefore, emphasizes, as an example, in this research contribution that you're going to make, if we don't see a discussion, for instance, of power relations, how you are emancipating particular groups or socially excluded groups, then you are not engaged in critical realist research. This is the emphasis that the worldview that you bring in the research process definitely will influence not only the product, but how you communicate the product of that research. And we communicate the product of research through writing, which we don't teach. We don't teach how to write academically. We attempt to do that, but it is not easy to teach academic writing. Right, so that's the emphasis of this idea of the culture of research, implying let us incorporate ethics in how we approach our research, and it is okay to bring a worldview and make your contribution from that perspective, so that when you engage in a form of academic writing, then you are making a statement that my contribution is from this particular perspective, not from another perspective, and that is acceptable from a research perspective. Now, so the challenge then in terms of writing is that we need to understand we need to read effectively as researchers. And part of what I'm pointing out in this particular slide is that because of the changed environment where we now rely on AI, or AI is part of us now, the assumption is that they're with us and they're not going to go away, that there may be a need for much more transparency in how we report our research. And one way of trying to do that is to approach research from a systematic. We know that research is done systematically, but we know sometimes the way we write, for instance, in the literature review chapter, we may not be doing that from a systematic perspective. We tend, most students or researchers tend to be haphazard. They struggle to piece together a literature review chapter. And so I think it is high time that we focus more on how do we carry out a systematic review of literature. It should be part of the process of writing, rather than carrying out a review of literature in a haphazard manner. And the reason why this is that because you have to use AI tools, or you may be forced to use AI tools, then the idea of transparency is now much, much more urgent and important. So that, that process of science that requires that we be transparent in the process to allow, for instance, for replicability of what you're doing is now much, much more urgent because of the role of AI, the increasing role of AI in research. And you have seen the impact already. A lot of experiments being done. AI has proven that it can pass exams by getting a B in schools of business, in schools of law, and it has also been used to do exams in medical schools. There are students who have been reported to have completely used AI tools to write theses. So this demand for transparency is therefore much, much more urgent, so that we avoid the ethical that they actually present to us. So what you see in front of you is a move towards emphasizing, can we do a systematic, adopt a systematic process of doing literature reviews, because the systematic approach emphasizes the transparency that you put in the process. And so that's what you see in front of you. And so in each of the stages of your research, you will find that there is a role that AI tools or these digital research assistants play in that particular process. So I've just given an example of how, for instance, after a student or a researcher has identified a number of concepts, because we know that from our discipline, we mostly deal with concepts, how the concepts are related to each other. For instance, how X influences that. And obviously, we go into the literature to try and determine or have a proper understanding of those concepts that we have identified to be related in one way or the other. So obviously, the systematic process then requires that you lead the process of literature review is led by a review question or a number of review questions. And even in that process now, you can use AI without, there are many AI tools that can be used to carry out that systematic process. And the challenge is, how should we address the ethical issues around the use of AI? For instance, I've just given an example of one of them called litmaps.com. Now, litmaps.com, if you think about how a researcher struggles to ask the question, where do I start from? What are the key literature that I should consult in order for me to understand this concept that is confronting me? It's a major issue, and we struggle to ask the students, you are mostly referring to peripheral literature. I don't see you, consulting or referring to literature of the experts, of the gurus in this particular discipline, or where this concept emerged from. So a tool such as litmaps.com lessens that trouble by, if you do a search using one of those concepts, for instance, if that student has identified a number of those concepts, if you go into litmaps.com, it is able to identify for you what are the key academic papers or otherwise where you find that concept is applied or is discussed or is described or is explained. And it also provides you a link of all those major papers that discuss that particular concept. So already just within one AI search engine, you are able to efficiently approach the process of discovering key literature by using an AI tool. Now, the question is what it is representing, is it unethical? Why should you not use it? It's basically, making the work easier for you to identify the key literature and how they are connected. Before, we had to print them out and try and find the connections ourselves. Now you get a map of it. And even as you explore further, as you explore the capabilities of this particular tool, it tells you how the concepts are actually connected to each other. Is that not good? Because it frees our minds for other things. Yeah? Instead of struggling to come up with this particular map on your own, it gives you already the key literature items. Prof, you have a question? Which other things? We should use our minds for thinking. Now, if it has already given you the connections, you are much more worried, for instance, what is the strength of the relationship between those concepts, instead of focusing on how is this paper related to this particular paper? It is already giving you a map of how the concepts are actually connected to each other, and worry about more issues of causality between the different concepts. What are the underlying mechanisms why those concepts are related the way they are related? So your mind is left for other things. Your mind is left for aspects of creative discovery that science is meant to be about, rather than focusing on the mechanics of how to arrive at that great finding or innovative idea. So I think it is quite a useful tool, for instance, in that process of creatively trying to discover what are these useful papers for me to start understanding this specific concept. Just by a simple search, you get all that information from an AI tool. Okay. The second one is, now, apart from just finding the major papers, you still need to read the papers. Remember, now your mind has to come in still. You still need to read and understand the papers. Now, when you're starting, it may be difficult, even though you have this map of how the papers are connected. You still want, in the beginning, to try and understand what do these papers really talk about, to have an initial understanding. And so for a tool such as the one in front of you, Paper Digest, it actually summarizes for you those papers that you have put in there to understand how you'd approach writing a literature review section and how those various papers are connected. So it even gives you a synthesis of those papers. So the initial one just provided connections. This now makes it easier for you to understand how would you arrange the knowledge in your work by first providing you a synthesis of those papers. That's what you see at the bottom there. I've just picked a part of it where it lists some of the papers, and below it provides you a description or a synthesis of all those papers that you want to understand in terms of what they're about, what knowledge are they providing you. Now, I want to emphasize that most of these AI tools are still experimental. So it's not that you are taking what they're giving you. You look at, it is for your understanding. You want to understand a group of papers, what are they really saying? And then you can go ahead and start looking at the individual papers to fit them in a particular role within your research project as you write. So this is another example, Paper Digest. You can see the format it provides you. They are much, much more advanced than what you see here. And actually think that the biggest problem now for researchers is literacy on these AI tools, so that we focus on better practice of our science, which is, by understanding a different form of research using these AI tools. So from, it doesn't mean that you still ignore the use of other, what you may call archaic tools. It is very funny that we can call a spreadsheet an archaic tool almost right now. But, not a long time ago, it was one of the AI tools, so to speak. It's almost archaic, but we still have to summarize the papers that, in terms of our understanding. And generally what we have done before is to look at various aspects of a paper. So while the Paper Digest platform will provide you a summary for your understanding, now you need to move to the stage of how do you interpret the information in those papers, because that is where your own understanding comes from. We must know that writing is unique, writing is individual. It is difficult to copy somebody's form of writing. but you can aspire to write like a particular writer. Many of us, try to do that. I mean, when we start, we identify some certain groups of papers. I like the way this person writes, a particular guru in the field, and you aspire to write like that, by practicing, trying to write the way that particular person writes as a way of communication. But you still need to. So this is just an example of how you can summarize um, the papers that you're looking at to enhance your understanding and interpretation. Because what we normally say is paraphrasing by replacing with synonyms is not the paraphrasing that is envisaged by the tools such as Turnitin. Replacing with synonyms is still plagiarism. You need to bring in your own understanding and interpretation of a paragraph that you have read by using your own words through your understanding, right? So that's why they still need to, from your own perspective, summarize your understanding and synthesis of those individual papers, even though these tools have made it easier for you, has made you much more efficient in the process. All right. The other part relates to, so there are many, many others. I've tried to subdivide them into what they can do. For instance, a simple tool such as Quillbot is also an AI tool. I mean, if you just look at what it is able to do, we tend to use it a lot for paraphrasing, but it has a lot of other features. I think the current release is you're actually able to write a full article within it. You are able to read different papers within it and transfer synthesis to your writing within that particular application. So Quillbot, as an additional AI tool, is able to we're able to use it to outline our writing structure and also use summaries from it to be able to understand what you are writing about. Now, remember, when you get to this stage, you have already finished with the interpretation that you capture, for instance, in that spreadsheet. So now you start the writing process, and we are saying, apart from the Microsoft Word that we use or whatever else you're using, the AI tools themselves are also advancing to the extent where you can actually write and do searches from Google Scholar, from any other database within the actual tool itself. And so this is really what we're talking about in terms of these AI tools. So as I indicated, the issue is not whether we need to change or not. I don't think that's the issue. The issue is that we started changing the writing process a long time ago, even when we started using Microsoft Word. We are already changing, how we write academically. Now, you can see, for instance, in this part of Quillbot, you are able to actually look at synthesis of academic papers, but it also goes as far as picking out other gray literature, which is not academic papers. You see there on the right, you are able to also get non-academic papers from the internet, etc. And what I like about the referencing systems is that they are keeping up. They are able to, you can reference these AI tools appropriately. There are ways of referencing them. They are also able to, they are also incorporated in the settings of these particular AI tools. Now, apart from just having an outline, we also must understand that for us to write, we need to synthesize the material that we are reading and summarize them in some form. So that process of what we are calling thematic summarizing is actually the process of critically analyzing the literature that you are reading and forming interpretations and writing something. So thematic summarizing is that process where you want to understand the article that is in front of you, so that you form your own interpretations about that particular article. So it is a form of, it is a form of content analysis, which we always try to do when you read an article or a piece of text or any material that you are using for research purposes. And again, here, there's a lot of AI tools that are there that are able to help the researcher to shorten that process of trying to understand an article. What are the different ways of looking at this particular article to reduce the load on interpretation. I think part of what we suffer from is, do we understand this paper? Can we interpret it properly and put it in our own words? And so part of what the AI tool is trying to do is to shorten that process so that you focus on interpreting the paper, not the mechanism of how to go about it. Right? So somebody has even given a YouTube video that I've provided down there, that in that process of thematic summarizing, we need to know how to read an article. And he mentions that you can actually read an article in less than 10 minutes if you know what to look for in any article. And I think this is something that many emerging researchers or young researchers struggle with. So, for instance, if you look at a title, we must be aware that a title also communicates or should communicate. A properly worded title of an article should communicate what the paper is about. And so in terms of trying to exclude certain articles, you actually start from that point. What is this paper all about? Is it communicating properly what it is about? Is it relevant for me? etc. That should come from the article, the title of the abstract, the article right away. And then we also know that the abstract is actually, or should be, a miniature version of the article. So again, that is the first point. If I read the abstract, can I get the gist of this article completely in terms of the background, the focus of the literature review, the theory that was used, what are the methods, what are the results, and the conclusions? That the abstract should communicate that in your writing, or even if you are reading an article, you should be able to understand what is in that article from the abstract. Now, introduction, then, what should be the focus as you are reading? We should know that in the introduction or the background of the study, the idea that paper should communicate is what is currently known about that problem that you are interested in. That's why you are reading. So a researcher focuses on a problem. You don't understand the concepts. You want to clarify the concepts. You go back to literature. You research literature to help in that clarity in your mind. So therefore, the literature review in the background is focused on what is known about that issue that you're focusing on. But it is also focusing on what is not known, because that is where you derive your research gap and then make a claim that this is the focus of my particular study. So the introduction should be able to communicate that. What is known, what isn't known, and therefore, given that I know what is known and what isn't known, researchers must think about, but what is the desired future? You are not just trying to understand the problem. If the problem was solved, what would be the solution? And that's why we talk about a hypothesis in the scientific method, because the hypothesis is basically an unconfirmed answer to the problem that you're looking at. And the hypothesis is derived from the literature review. So what we are emphasizing is that as you start on exploring a problem, or when you are reading a paper, in the background, all that information should be clear. What is known, what isn't known, and what is the desired future in the form of a hypothesis, or in the form of a research question, or in the form of a proposition depending on the type of research. Of course, the last paragraph in an introduction is where you'll find the purpose of the study is all this. So as you are reading, then there should be specific things that you're looking for in the different parts of an article. So of course, in the methods, then you are interested in how the research in that paper was carried out. And part of what is said is that that section really is not intended for the reader. The method section is actually intended for the reviewers, or those who are, other scientists who want to try and replicate the study, unless the researcher wants to adopt the methodology that is reported there. So sometimes you don't have to read the methodology section if your interest is not to adopt the particular approach there. If your interest is to understand the purpose of the study, focus on the introduction. And sometimes you also don't have to read the results section because the results section just focus on presenting the results without any discussion. Some people do present discussions, but that is not its intention. Its intention is just to present what you found out. And then, those can then be discussed in a different section, under discussions, or in the conclusions. So if you see the focus of the genre of any article, you can quickly read an article without necessarily reading other sections at all, such as methodology or even the results section. You may not be interested in how they presented the data, but what are the summary of their significant findings, what are the implications, and maybe what's the direction for future research. So that's why they say that you can actually read an article in less than 10 minutes, because if you have already removed a number of sections out, you focus on the abstract, introduction, conclusions, and you get the gist of what the paper is, make a decision whether you're going to use it or not. And so there are also tools that can help in doing this. We have this tool called Scholar Sigh. I tend to read it like Scholar Cry, because we're mostly crying when we're writing. But they call it Scholar Kai. And, it is a very helpful AI tool for summarizing information, summarizing articles that you come across, and it gives various options. For instance, in that first slide, you see is basically giving a summary of the one article. And this is not copied from the article. It is providing its interpretation of the article to make it easier for you to understand, and therefore, try and determine if the interpretation it has provided is making sense or not. Remember, it is also emphasized that the human being, the researcher, is the one who is the domain expert. And so what it is providing you, though it is coming from wisdom in the field, you must interpret it so that when you are writing, your intention is revealed in what you are writing. Because if you copy it and pasted it, your intention as a researcher is not in the writing. But your tone that you would have used is not in the writing. And that's why sometimes it is easy to pick out when a student or a young researcher is just copying and pasting. Sometimes they forget that the tones in the different paragraphs are actually different. And you can, if you are an experienced evaluator, you'll be able to pick out the tone used in this paragraph. This looks like a different person, because the way we write is from us, is from you, the uniqueness of every individual and the worldview that you actually bring to the writing process. That uniqueness is part of that writing process. The next section, it even tries to list some of the key concepts. Again, we struggle with when we are approaching a problem area and maybe we are just faced with a major concepts such as disaster management, sometimes we struggle with what are the key concepts around this concept of disaster management, for instance. And so Scholar C or Scholar Psi is able to identify what are the key concepts for that, surrounding an issue that you want to address. It will suggest. And so for you as a domain expert is to ask, are these making sense? Because as we have said, you don't give your mind to the assistant. Their work is to assist. So you are expected to know in terms of domain knowledge if those concepts that the assistant is suggesting make sense or not. So I think in that sense, in terms of even suggesting what are the relevant concepts for that particular problem or issue, it then becomes a useful tool for the academic writer. The other part that it does, so it does also provide synopsis and many other aspects that frees your mind to look at other things and to create, to interpret information and come up with creative solutions. All right, so the next series of slides, I'm not going to, I'm just going to stop shortly so that I give a chance for if there are any questions or any engagements that we may want to have. I just detail some aspects of, thematic summarizing. Now, this therefore comes after, in terms of now how you are interpreting what the different AI tools have provided you. So we are still not taking, we are saying that the AI is not doing the work. It is making it easier for you to focus on how to interpret the information, excuse me, the information that that is before you. And I talk about referencing in different sections. And again, researchers also struggle with this, emerging or young researchers. There are general guidelines that you will find in the literature, for instance, how to summarize. But a general rule of thumb is that if there are more than 4 words that you are picking directly from a research, then you should have a direct quotations for those words and actually indicate the page number. That's really the general guideline, so that you don't fall foul of being unethical. And that's the example that you see at the first row, shown on the right side. And so this is something that we face many times. Sometimes we ask ourselves, but the words that we use are almost the same, right? I mean, so 4 words may be very few for you to have a direct quotation. Yeah, so if they're the same, well, why don't you try and write those same words in a different way? Why pick what they have given you as the only way? Because there are various ways that we can interpret something. That is just the extra step that you need to go to, so that we acknowledge the IP of those the articles that you're actually reading. All right, so that is just a further explanation of how to focus on referencing. I think the emphasis here is that even when we use those AI tools, we need to understand how to reference them, and there is a way to do that. I just want to give that example. For instance, if you are writing the review methodology section of your systematic literature review, you do know that you can actually ask the AI tool to write it exactly the way you want it. I've indicated there avoiding plagiarism. There's a spelling mistake there. But if you're writing the review methodology, one of the AI tools I used here was ChatGPT, to actually instruct it to give me a hypothetical paragraph of that review section. So it gives you exactly the way you want it. It depends on, and you can make the request as complicated as it can be. And you can see that example, that provide a hypothetical example of inclusion criteria from the Prisma systematic review. Some of you may know about it, for English papers on a topic titled, so you can actually give it the actual topic. And it tries to construct a paragraph, along those instructions, as the example shown there. Now, it is very easy to just copy it and paste it because it makes sense. You may just need to change a few things if you want to be unethical and go ahead and assume it is your work. But what we know is that that won't be your work. You may have contributed by asking the question, but the work is the AI's. But a lawyer told me that it's actually for both of you. It's both for the AI and for you as the researcher. So the question is, who should be given the degree? Should we give the AI and you? Yeah. So it gives you exactly like this. And this is an example. Sorry, I think I got the wrong one. Yeah, so it gave me a paragraph of how I should write it. Now, what you see actually in front of you is my attempt to change, to interpret what it provided so that it is, we avoid plagiarism in terms of what it has provided you. That's why you see in the middle there, I've even provided how to reference, ChatGPT from an APA perspective. And from an APA perspective, it makes an assumption that you're actually having a conversation with the AI. It's like a person. So if you are a researcher, maybe you would have interviewed somebody. If there are major ideas from that conversation, you are supposed to reference that person, whether it is a YouTube or from a focus group or from a preliminary review, preliminary interviews. So that is the manner in which you should approach how to reference these AI tools, which are regarded as, conversational tools. So from APA, then you are meant to paraphrase from an interpretive perspective the outcome of that instruction that you saw there at the top, the sort of the query that I gave to it. And you are further meant to demonstrate that even though the AI is telling you about that Prisma, for instance, what additional reading did you do to demonstrate your understanding of that piece of literature that it is providing you? Because remember, part of the idea is when you're doing a literature review, which we do most of the time when we're doing research, is to demonstrate awareness of the issues in the field. So apart from what it is giving you, the facts that it is giving you, as a researcher and a writer, you need to go further and read more and give more references related to that specific issue that is being given to you by the AI. Those are the additional references that you see in that paragraph down there, and which is now summarized. Yes? Go ahead.
It gives you a hypothetical example of how you can synthesize an idea from a certain source. Now, let's say the three of us here need a hypothetical example using a certain concept. Will it give the three of us the same result?
Most likely not. In fact, even if you don't like the response, you can actually tell it to regenerate another response. Because what it's basically doing is to try and get information from all over the web. And there are different scenarios that it can pick and present to you. So it is not the same all the time. However, what it will do is to learn the responses that you are retaining. Because if you make a query, it will give you a response. If you like it, you are most likely to follow up with another query. So it will know, I mean, obviously it is AI. It will know that this is the pattern of validity that I should retain for this particular person in terms of how this person has been asking and retaining those responses. But to your question, it is unlikely to give you the same response. It will give different hypothetical scenarios. Yeah. Is that fine? Okay, thank you. That was all I had for you. Are there any questions or comments? Prof?
Thank you, Prof. Chara. That was quite stimulating. The use of ChatGPT and AI tools to do our research. For me, my concern is that if all these AI tools are there, then why should we spend our time doing all these things? Because they can be done for us anyway. And so what's the role for us as academics now? Is it just to teach people how to think and be happy and to talk to each other? It's a genuine concern.
Yes, what role should we be playing? Do you want to respond, or maybe another question or so? If there are any comments from the internet? Now, let me mention this, and I'm sorry, I will talk about it from partly from the idea of philosophy. Research is what we use to practice science. That's what we know. And the reason that we engage in research is to determine the truth about something. And, philosophy is the search for truth. So if you think about what we try to do as researchers, every day, even in our work life, we try to solve problems. We want to find what is the truth about that specific problem. Now, particularly from our disciplines, or some of the disciplines that are applied in nature, we are more interested in how those problems are reflected in the context that we are studying them. So if it is an organization, we have identified a problem which affects banking, we are interested in how we can solve that problem from an applied perspective, how we can solve that problem in that banking sector, in a community, in a society, etc. And so then to what you have asked, the AI can write and present to you a scenario, but I don't believe that it is giving you a scenario of that specific context that you are focused on. The problem expresses itself in a specific context, and your interest as a researcher is to understand that problem from that context. That's why we normally describe the context of our study, because that problem, you want to understand it in that context and apply a solution in that particular context. The AI will not be able to give you that. It will be able to give you other scenarios which may be closer to that context, but is not original to that context. So if you think about why we engage in research, obviously the idea of originality is number one. And that originality only emerges from the knowledge of the context, which AI is not giving yet. We may be able to get there, but that depends on the information that is able to use about, if there's information about that specific context. And probably by the time we reach there where it is able to do that, we will be in heaven. There will be no need to work. I mean, why would you be, because research is focused on solving problems. If we are able to have a tool which is solving all our problems, then there will be no point. But we are not there at all, and I don't think we'll ever be there, because we know that the environment, the external environment keeps on changing. We didn't know, for instance, that Google can actually be threatened by these AI tools. Now we can see they are threatened when they pour in over $100 billion. So we know the environment is changing. We must continue to adapt. Unfortunately, for me, this is fortunate. Fortunately, now we have AI tools that can help us probably to focus more on innovation, more creativity in terms of these problems that we are focused on. We become more productive from a labor perspective rather than spending time on the mechanics of it. That's what I really am trying to emphasize. I do think that with their use, we can be more creative and original in terms of how we come up with these solutions, Prof. I don't know if you have a follow-up or an additional contribution.
Can I take a follow-up quickly, Prof,
Yeah.
before that side? No, Prof, thanks for the presentation. Prof, I'm not sure, man, in terms of, the evolution of the human species, then when you look onto, the AI, machine learning, deep learning, because if you were to look on how we evolved because we're able to think, very deeply about the issues that evolve around us.
Yeah.
But now we're using the machines to actually do that thinking. So how does it then impact, us as humans in terms of our evolutionary path and all that, But, because currently now I'm actually writing an article in terms of AI and the future of work, so it's some of the things now that I'm just really concerned about, to say that we might end up, losing, our place as part of, human evolution, in terms of the AI. Thanks, bro.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. I want to say that we are, the intention in terms of creating AI is that it should mimic the human brain. I think that's the intention of designing AI tools. But as to whether we should give it our brain, that is something else. We need to remember that those specific AI tools are also being designed by specific people or specific individuals. Those who own the AI obviously has power over some of this process. This is something that has been happening over time. But part of, as I get to your question, is that if you think about how, based on that evolutionary journey that you are referring to, we have always tried to innovate to release our minds for other things. But I think that the AI may allow our minds to evolve to focus on other things. We have always tried to be innovative. Even coming up with how to make fire was an innovation in itself, so that we are able to cook food and burn food, though sometimes we want to go back to eating the raw food. But just coming up with fire was a major innovation. Now, did it release us from, did it make us more productive, for instance? And I think it did, so that we were able to, even our diet changed in terms of just having that innovation. So what we don't know, is still a dilemma, but if it is an innovation as the others that have come before it, I am confident that our minds will learn to adapt, to change, to approach research in a particular way, and not necessarily, the way we are actually doing it right now. The scientific method, which is over 400 years, and does not mean that it is wrong, no. But we seem to be focusing on the practices that were happening those many years ago. Have we changed the process of the practice of research? And I think we have been changing incrementally, but this may likely affect how we approach research. And it will force organizations, even universities, to reflect on what is the role of researchers, what is the role of teachers. I mean, if an AI can score a B, what is the role of teachers? So I believe that, and I'm using the word believe, that our minds will evolve. And there is some literature to support this, that when human beings are threatened, The AI, remember, is now being from a HI, human-computer interaction literature, that part of it says that when we use technology, we regard technology as a guest in our house. And just like a guest comes to your house, there are many cultures that say, if you visit me, after 3 days, you are not a guest. Because now you want to occupy the home, all right? So as human beings, we have always approached, intrusions to handle those intrusions in that manner, that AI is actually a guest of human beings. And I believe that when we are threatened, there will be a large group of people that can resist or will overcome it by changing the way we think. It's a roundabout, but that is my belief. Is there was some, I think there was somebody there.
Should I go first? So mine is really just a comment, but my comment at the same time, it looks like everyone's question and comment has touched on it already, but what the heck, I'll still shoot.
Yeah.
So this reminds me of the fact that, in the AI ethics space, it's a big space. A lot of people are playing in that space. And ChatGPT and other natural language robots or bots are actually featuring and taking a big space. But I remember in one of the arguments, one professor says, we will be threatened. Those paradigms and those worldviews that we talk about, we will borrow different types of those, each of us. Mine won't be the same to yours.
Yeah.
So for you, it will be easy to accept it. For me, it will be difficult to accept it. But we can imagine that maybe humans are not responsible for effecting change in the world, but there is a ghost of change that is doing change in the direction it wants to do it. And if that is the case, and we keep fighting the AI, ChatGPT and everything, we might be fighting a battle we're going to lose. And one guy makes an example of the university 400 years ago. Apparently, the student was not allowed to own a textbook, and the lecturer stood in front and spoke, and you had to write notes as quickly as possible, and that was your textbook. And when there was that transition to textbooks, some thought, this is making the student lazy.
Mm-hmm.
And today we've adapted to that. And do we want to go back? It's up to us. And lastly, one guy said, in this AI thing as well, let's take artificial. Would you find Madonna competing with a Madonna look-alike? So we humans, we have that brain. Like you were saying, Prof, it's mimicking the human brain. We're better than it. The gentleman says we are critical thinkers, and is it taking that away? But by us discussing that, it's giving us another dimension of critical thinking that wasn't there before. So it is evolution, and it's giving us things that were not there before. So maybe in our paradigms and worldviews, let's not be scared of change.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Prof, for the wonderful presentation. Actually, mine is not a question, but a piece of something we can all think about.
Okay.
Let us look at the nature of the students we have. I'm not saying in South Africa, students as students.
Yeah.
Why I'm saying students as students, I have a scenario, I don't want to waste a lot of time, where I was invited as an external examiner in a seminary. The seminary trains priests, those who are going to churches to preach. And they were writing exams, and I was invited as an external person to come and visit them when they're writing exams. I abruptly entered the examination rooms, and I found 3, not 1, 2, 3, they were copying from a paper. Remember, these are the people who are going to come in the churches and preach to you. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say if a priest can cheat in an exam, now we are having a scenario where we are telling students to use, for example, Bitmap, which is beautiful software, but at the end of the day, we are going to tag a mark to this student's qualification. And we say we are awarding you a degree of Master of Science or PhD and so on. But the student has really not done anything. Where are we heading? That is the question for everybody, all of us. Then the other concern I have, you touched it a bit, but I was not satisfied with what I would have loved to hear about the systematic literature review, which is becoming more popular these days. The dissertations I've marked of late of systematic literature review shows that there's a lot of confusion. Either the students get confused or the supervisors get confused of how the systematic review, what is the purpose? This is where I want you to come in, to give clearly a distinction. Am I using systematic literature review as a methodology? From there, I give them the results and so on. Or I'm doing a systematic literature review to get a deeper understanding of the concept I'm researching on, so that I can proceed with what I want to do. This is where I want you to help us to give a more clarity. It has been confusing me a lot. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I didn't want to go into the details of the systematic literature review. I wanted to emphasize that given the many challenges that we now face, for instance, related to AI, it is now become, it behooves us to be much more transparent in the process of how we report our literature review, because you may be presenting a literature review section that has been generated by AI, for instance. And for me, the purpose of a systematic literature review has two purposes. Number one, it is still a literature review, but you want to understand from an empirical perspective, what are the research gaps that you find in the literature? So one of the outcomes, and this is an outcome for any review, is just that now we are saying you are actually detailing a methodology of how to arrive at those research gaps. So what we have traditionally called the empirical section of the literature review, we know is targeted at coming up with the research gaps that you eventually address. Part of them you eventually address, you don't have to address all of them. That's one purpose. But you are saying how you arrived at them. So within the literature review section, yes, you are saying you are actually coming up with a methodology for carrying out the systematic literature review. And then, of course, the second purpose of a systematic literature review is to identify the relevant theory for understanding that particular problem. So I had mentioned, for instance, that the very first, what you bring first into any problem is a worldview. That worldview is not just the paradigm in terms of I'm approaching it from this particular perspective. The other thing that you have to bring in is what perspective from a theoretical point of view am I bringing in understanding this problem? And for us to do that, we need to identify the relevant theories that help us in understanding that problem. So those two purposes to me are the reasons why. Identify from an empirical perspective, what are the research gaps? And the empirical review is where we require a lot of recent literature. You can, when you're identifying a research gap, you can't say that we were told to do this 10 or so years ago. I mean, things may have changed. That's why we insist when you're looking at the empirical review, it's much more recent literature because you are trying to emphasize how that concept has been, or the concepts have been applied in particular context. So if you are identifying the research gap that was 10 or so years ago, it may be old news already, and certainly in our disciplines, that may not really be relevant now. Now then, the theoretical review of literature is where we identify the theory that we use for understanding a specific problem. Like I indicated, we always bring a perspective in any problem, and it is that theory that gives you the perspective, is that theory which is like a mirror to understand the problem. And we must always not forget that the research is actually, you actually focused on searching. You have seen a problem, you don't understand it, you go to the literature, you go back to the literature, you retrace your steps to understand that problem. You want to understand what the research gaps are, but how others have tried to address that problem before from a theoretical perspective. So typically, in terms of a theoretical review, when you're identifying a theory, you may find that the theory is old. So Michael Porter may have come up with his competitive strategy in 1980. So you will refer to old literature, but you will also be concerned about how has it changed since then? How has it been applied? So I think those two purposes are critical in terms of identifying research gaps and also identifying the theory, but you are detailing the approach within the literature review section, how you went about actually doing that. Is that fine?
Thanks, Prof. Can we take one question? I think we had two people virtually who had questions.
Okay.
Ernest, you can go ahead.
Ernest, you are muted.
Ernest, you can ask a question. Or Paseka Mtaung. We can't hear you. If you can probably unmute or check your mic on your side.
Ernest, we can see you talking, but we can't hear you.
We can't hear you. Okay, let us do that. Good morning, guys. The question I have for you guys is this important for us to stay here and listen all this conversation of yours, or we must go to class to do what we're supposed to do? Because as okay, we're sitting here, we're listening all the theories and everything that you guys are speaking. So we thought, okay, it is going to be like after this, okay, we're going to write something. Is this important for us to stay, or we must go to class?
You are free to leave if you have had enough.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so I think that will be, there's another hand there.
Hi, Prof. I just want to ask a question based on the conversational AI tools in education. You briefly mentioned that if like the students do a copy and paste, if like you're an experienced analyst or observer, you can tell the different sentiments in that. So I just want to ask you, do you have like synthesis metrics that actually categorize the different issues or different arguments in an issue? Because I would imagine that if you were to discredit that particular essay of a student, but if it has like relational known facts, it will be rational. But if you decide to do otherwise, even if like you get two different sentiments in the essay, but if you you discredit it according to your discretion, it will be very irrational. So do you have like the metrics, synthesis metrics, or you rely solely on your discretion?
Now, let me respond this way, that if you talk about a tool such as Turnitin, which focuses on similarity, remember, it is not looking at plagiarism. It's just looking at issues of similarity in terms of what you have used. The discretion in terms of assessing plagiarism has always remained with whoever is reviewing your work. You find that in some institutions, for instance, they don't tell you that you're allowed a plagiarism index of 20% or 15%. They say no. That tool is giving you a similarity index. Discretion remains with whoever is reviewing your work, and I think that is like that because in the scientific process, we recognize the peer review process. The peer reviewer is meant to be an expert in that particular area and can detect or can use their discretion to make a judgment call in terms of whether this output from Turnitin, I should take it as it is or use my discretion to decide. So I want to emphasize that discretion has always remained with whoever is reviewing. We use the tool to try and decide for us, but that's not what it is meant for. But we know that there are additional challenges related to the current AI. I mean, if you go into Turnitin, they're now trying to even develop it further to be able to detect some of those hypothetical scenarios that can be presented. So there are still developments in this area. There are also AI tools that are being developed from a scientific perspective to try and address some of these ethical dilemmas. So from my perspective is that if we have it with us, we should be concerned about, I think Prof. Kalema mentioned it, how should we use them because they are here? How can we use these tools so that we are able to do research ethically and not unethically? I mean, ignoring them is putting our heads under the sand, while the dilemma is already with us. And certainly there are certain benefits to it. We need to address the issue of ethics. How can we use these tools much more ethically? But discretion remains with reviewers. And that discretion remains with them because it is assumed that they are domain experts, whether it is your supervisor or an external examiner or external reviewer. Yeah. Thank you.
Prof, can you take two last questions? I think one is online, Amahle, and then it will be the gentleman here. Then we can break for tea. Amahle, you can go ahead.
Yeah, apologies for the video connection. I just had load shedding. Just had a few questions and comments on that. So just wanted to understand in a sense of a person develops his own research and everything, and then uses the algorithms of AIs and the methodologies to actually incorporate something with whatever he wants. Because for me, let me put an example for me in terms of grammar. I'm not good at it. I'm good with numbers. So I use it as a point of IP as my own. Do I still have to now reference whatever I've done from scratch as opposed to referencing it as a third party, or is it still my own idea and own thoughts around creating that concept? And then my other comment is that, isn't it supposed to be a community thing whereby I do see there's a lack of whatever, like what I have in terms of grammar, creating grammar in a sense of when not all of us are privileged enough to actually formulate different English structures and everything. So for me, I use it as that dilemma to actually assist me with that. So let's say now I put it out in the community it helps a lot of people. Does that now still, yeah, that's my question is around that. I'm not sure if you understand it, whereby with regards to the AI now, it's there for the purpose of actually helping those that are not fortunate enough to actually construct. And also with regards to the research and everything, aren't we doing the same thing as when we're doing research papers? We have different resources, scholars resources out there in the internet. But now there's a AI which already collected that amount of data. It's in one hub now. For you as an individual, it's easier now to actually search in one engine rather than using multiple resources, whereas it's going to give you a constructive output. As you mentioned before, that it's not always going to give you the same approach in the sense of giving you the response, but it's always going to be different based on the algorithms that are behind that engine. Thank you.
Great. So the issues that you are mentioning, of course, okay, so if it gives you material and you copy it as it is and use it as your, pass it as your own, it doesn't change the fact that it is plagiarism, because that information has been passed to you by that AI. Consider that AI as a person. It has been passed to you by that AI, the person has synthesized it to you to make it easier for you to understand the information. The challenge is now for you to interpret what it has given you, because if you pass that one as your own, it is regarded as plagiarism. Yes, we are all very limited or constrained in terms of language. And I can emphasize that not all of us started where we are. Writing is, you learn through trying, you write a paragraph, try and improve on it the next day. But the point being made is that you cannot pass what has been given to you by AI as your own unless you actually interpret it in your own words and give a reference to it. Now, your own words could be your language. If you can communicate better in your language, you are allowed to communicate in your language. And if you're able to express those sentences properly in your language and translate into the English language that is required, so be it. We try to communicate or use language that we don't understand. Some communities, whether you talk about Chinese or Arabs, they express their thoughts in their language and try and translate into English if they want to communicate to an English audience. So interpretation doesn't mean that you must interpret in the English language. You must think about what language comes naturally to you, so that then the problem becomes, how do you translate from that language that you have used into the language of communication that is required for that particular outlet. But certainly you cannot pass the AI paragraph or paper as your own. You are asking a question, just like you can consult any expert. If you quote that expert verbatim from a plagiarism perspective, to avoid plagiarism, you are meant to actually show that you quoted that person verbatim. If there are page numbers, you are meant to indicate that, in this transcript, this is where he actually said this, so that you don't pass exactly what has been given to you as your own. But as we are still evolving, we don't fully understand it. And that's why I hope that the conversation should be, how do we make it better? How do we understand it better and apply it in the research that we do? Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Thank you very much for a very insightful presentation. In relation to my question, I have been slightly answered from some of the questions and some of the responses that you gave. Basically, my question related to AI using available data and analyzing that data, which can be flawed at times. And so My question basically was that, doesn't that impede on, the creativity of the majority, and not everyone, of the population in generating new ideas or our own revolution, until new ways of integrating and adapting to this ethical dilemma that we are faced with?
What I think it does is for us to think creatively for solving other problems. If we are saying that AI is able to do certain things, then the question is, why should we focus on those things that the AI can actually do? Can we find a way of adapting to our environment in a different way? It is able to do for us certain things so that we adapt. There are many problems in the environment that we need to address as humanity. And if some of those issues can be addressed by AI, so what? Now, for instance, somebody gave an example how schools, maybe we are resisting it as universities, but schools are already making children make use of AI to think about new ideas. Schools, as students or pupils, even at the level of standard 5, are now able to come up with business plans, business ideas, by learning from what is being proposed by the AI and asking themselves, if I was to do a small business of selling biscuits or whatever it is in my area, I can use this example to come up with a business. This is a standard 5 or a grade 5 pupil now. Can you imagine me in 1980s coming up with a business plan and what it will take to come up with a business plan? The infrastructure or even the knowledge to do that was not there. The technology was not there in terms of, so our focus in terms of education, primary level in the 80s, is a different environment completely. So these kids now are able to use them to explore their creativity more, being able to get answers quickly, for instance, to focus on the innovative nature of human beings. And I want to believe that we are on earth to innovate and adapt. In our nature as human beings, we are meant to be creative. So if there is technology that is releasing our minds to think about how we can adapt to the environment, why resist it? Why can't we think of other creative ways of solving the problems that face us? Thank you.
Thank you, Prof.
So my last word is that we should just be literate in AI tools. That should be the first thing. We must understand them and their capabilities and see how to apply them. Thank you very much.